Hi everyone. If you have not yet subscribed, please subscribe. It's free, but it really helps the channel to grow and to thrive. Thank you. So in regard to what our president is up to these days, by which I mean some of his recent wackadoodle cockamamie ideas, such as, for example, restoring the Alcatraz prison or imposing massive tariffs on foreign videos or setting up a parade on his birthday at great taxpayer expense, or pretending to be the Pope and putting out pictures of himself as such, or making grandiose statements like how in his first term I forget what he said about how he ruled his presidency, but now he's saying that he's in charge of the country and of the world. And all of this, when you hear it, the astrology is really obvious. It's Jupiter running amok, and this planet really tells the story when it comes to this guy, because he happens to be born with a very, very strong Jupiter, by which I mean it was stationary, dead stationed, and planets, when they are stationing in order to go direct or retrograde, they are greatly strengthened. In his case, it was stationing going direct, and so that explains his Jupiterian nature. And of course, the fact that it trines the sun and sextiles the moon, two very helpful aspects, greatly enhance the power even more. And yet, he has always been this way and continues to be this way. He tends to express the energy of this planet in largest measure in a very corrupt way, in what I call low-end Jupiter, so that Jupiter being the expansion principle, in contrast to Saturn, which is the contraction principle, expansion associates to confidence, but also to overconfidence. It'll associate to enjoyment, but also to indulgence, and confidence turns to arrogance, and you then get miscalculation, and you get things that don't work. So all of that is in play at the same time, and you are seeing right now, as we speak, really last month as well, because Jupiter, although it moves compared to Saturn quite quickly, has a 12-year cycle, where Saturn's is 30 years. So even so, last month it was already opposing his moon, and to some extent it still is, but now it's getting closer to conjoining his sun. The point is, he's in a Jupiter period, and this is bringing all those qualities into the foreground. And so then when you hear grandiose statements or big ideas, the way this guy operates, if something pops into his mind, he immediately assumes that, well, it has to work because he thought of it. You know, he's, after all, our very stable genius. But the point becomes that Jupiter is there now, but planets keep moving. And so I'm going to say by about the third week of this month, approximately, maybe a little later, as we go toward the end of the month, the Jupiter effect begins to lessen, because it breaks away from the Sun conjunction. It will still be in a sign, though, and continues to be in a sign until about the first week of June, whereupon it'll enter Cancer. That's a very different energy dimension, which for the, Doge douchebag is a pretty good thing, because he is a Cancer. And I think, Musk, we're talking about now for a second, I suspect the way in which that'll show up is through leaving or having much less connection to the Doge initiative. because Jupiter doesn't like working. It's an enjoyment planet, plus the fact that he has damaged his brand and all of that. But for Trump, Jupiter in Cancer is way, way more problematic, considerably more problematic, because that sign is not nearly as helpful. In fact, it's quite difficult in that it's his 12th sign. Now, one part of that will be that his criminality, which is where you find the 12th, because the 12th is, for example, the house of prisons, and that's where you find all the thieves and criminals, and he has several planets there, Mercury, which is the ruler of Gemini, Venus, Saturn. So he's definitely inclined that way. He reveals it constantly. He's not doing the high end of that house, which would be a spiritual dimension, meditation, etc. None of that. None. It's all the low end. Jupiter going through there will tend to incline him to even more of that. So on that level, we need to continue to be very vigilant, which I think in this case is much aided by the media. As much as people complain about the media, they do dig things up, and we'll probably know. It's important to know, because this is how you fight back and how you stop things and how you maintain some kind of control on his behavior. But that's where it's going. It'll definitely complicate matters. And when you put that together with the fact that the other cycle, the Saturn energy, is now soon going to go into Aries, but does return back to the Pisces degrees between the fall and the spring of 26, this is telling you ahead of time that a lot of his initiatives become more and more problematic, particularly because as time is passing. Right now we're in a little over 100 days. He still has plenty of support from the people that voted for him, but the buyer's remorse kicks in as time is passing, and so the next 100 days are going to be worse in that sense than the first 100, and the 100 after that even worse still, because you'll be getting metrics around the economy, the way he set it up. This is because he touched the third rail, on the Saturn point, the Saturn square. Very different than Jupiter. Of course, in this case, Jupiter, in a sense, helped him to make this kind of mistake, because the Jupiter, when it's malfunctioning, and the overconfidence that it can connect you to, you put it on connected to a Saturn period, and even though in the case of a normal person, it could be a very useful cycle, for someone like this, it's what can lead them into a total disaster. And this is what those tariffs, which are taxes on the American people, will do. But it takes a while to see, the empty shelves, the price increases, and so on. And so nothing like economics to eventually, you'll never push everyone or get everyone back, rather, but you'll get enough of a percentage. So if he's at now at best 42%, really good odds that he drops into the 30s, by which point it becomes very electorally compromising in some measure, because his own people begin to abandon him, because they then could lose their job. I mean, think about the Congress people. For the time being, they're not thinking about it too much, but as elections loom, they're going to be much more willing to separate themselves from his initiatives, which of course will become a lot more problematic for him. But the point is, we track this, we track it month to month, we see where things are going. I will always get more visibility as I see how he's expressing the energy. I mean, I'm seeing it now. It's pretty clearly a corrupt Jupiter that leads you into trouble. And then there's the fact that if you're looking further ahead, I'm starting to get the sense that Jupiter itself is the story of this whole period, at least on one level, because, with astrology you have many planets moving around, and there are explanations that are very important around Uranus, around Neptune, Saturn, etc. But the Jupiter part of this, I think, when I blend it with other cycles, is that he enters the scene in our lives, and he has been a presence even when he was in the background during the Biden administration, because there was this drive to return, which he was able to accomplish. But when you look at 2016, that's the Jupiter entering Libra, and that's where it'll be in 2028. And my feeling is that the Trump era, Trumpism, is a Jupiter cycle, basically, a period of Jupiter for him. The country goes through it for other reasons. It's not just Jupiter, but it's the notion that Jupiter cycles can be very reflective of periods in people's lives. I've noticed in my own life, Jupiter will be somewhere, and then I do something for those 12 years, and then I stop doing it, because that's how planets tend to work. There are also bigger cycles, like the 30-year cycle of Saturn is another way to measure, but Jupiter is a definite in that sense, and that's my feeling around where this is going. But of course, then we have to trust that we can overcome Trumpism through the electoral process, which I know for some people it's a hard pill to swallow. There's a lot of pessimism about what he may be able to accomplish around fudging elections and so forth. I'm in the camp that believes we can do this. We can go through the electoral process and we can get back to a better place. And part of it will be that he's trying to do things, he's ultra confident, falsely in many cases, but doesn't matter, really confident, he's trying things. But our system has a lot of checks and balances with a lot of interests in different camps, like the judicial branch has their own interest, even the Congress has eventually, everyone in the end thinks of themselves and their own job. So there are lots of checks, and so my sense is that we can be confident in the election system, but we'll find out, because we will be seeing elections, for example, long before the midterms in 2026. There are elections before that, so we'll be able to measure, and then we'll have the midterms to gauge how that goes. And that's pretty obviously the safest process, because when people talk about alternative ways to end the nightmare, to get beyond this era of Trumpism, if you point to revolution, like how would that work? I think at all costs we need to avoid a hot war. We're already in a Cold War, obviously, where the country is very divided, but the best way to overcome would be to change enough people's minds. You're not going to change everybody. It's really important to realize this. If you look historically, one party in a two-party system will always have around 40% minimum. So this would point to the fact that even in 28, which is a major change period, even if it switches, which I believe it will, where Uranus is and so forth at the time, but it doesn't mean that everybody's going to be happy. That could continue still 7 more years where there's more resistance, than usual. That could take us into the early years of the next decade. But certainly much better than this, and especially the necessity of transcending the attitudes and the ideas in Trumpism. The best way to do that by far is for people to see it closely, see what it's doing. You can talk economies all you like, but if you're seeing empty shelves, it turns into a bit of a comedy, because he's always going on about how the left, they're all communists and Marxists according to him. But whenever you see empty shelves, that's actually what communist regimes often have to grapple with, because of the lack of creativity in actual communism, which is not what this country is about. And the final thing I'll say, although this is not really Jupiter, but it's the switching planets, the Uranus energy in 2028 also tells me that this is where we're headed. But, again, I mean, we're a long way away from there. So my advice is put on your seatbelt and stay vigilant, particularly, obviously, what relates to you. What are you hearing about Social Security? What are you hearing about all kinds of things? Pay attention, but simultaneously have some kind of practice that helps you to connect to your own equanimity, tranquility, something that then creates some distance from all this. And you'll notice that if you're regular in that practice, it helps. It makes it a lot easier to watch what is, I agree, quite a nightmare with more detachment. And this is helpful both to feel better as well as to make better decisions, to do exactly what you need to do in order to navigate through.